Alright, now that we have the phonology of the proto-language down, we can start to create some words. But before we go crazy coining words left and right, we have to have an understanding of how to organize them into phrases. For the purposes of testing grammar and constructing simple sentences, we'll coin just a few basic root words. Root words are those that are not derived from any other word. These are normally simple, irreducible concepts. At this point in the process, word creation is not our primary concern, so you'll only need a handful of very basic roots. The most important ones to get down are the pronouns, plus a few basic nouns and verbs. Now that we have some words, how do we put them together? How can we take these words and form the sentence, "The person sees the animal"? Well, assuming there are no articles or complex morphology at this point, we need to establish a default word order. Any sentence will consist of three primary roles: the subject, the verb, and the object. All known natural languages distinguish between these three roles, but the order in which they come in the sentence is actually quite variable. Languages that put the subject first are by far the most commonly represented, but verb-initial languages are not unheard of. Languages with a default word order that puts the object first are extremely rare. And there are even some languages that have a free word order, relying on mechanisms other than word order to mark the subject and object, but we'll come back to that later on. I'm going to give our sample language a default word order of subject, object, verb, an extremely common word order, meaning that to say "the person sees the animal," we'd say it like this. What about if you use an adjective to say something like "the big animal"? Does the adjective come before or after the noun that it modifies? Well, that depends on whether your adjectives are derived from nouns or from verbs. In some languages, adjectives are simply nouns that are interpreted as adjectives through plain juxtaposition. In some languages, the adjective may actually be a verb. Many languages have adjectives that are recognizably distinct from nouns or verbs, but they ultimately derive from one of these two, or perhaps even from both of them. For our language, let's say that adjectives evolved from nouns. If that's the case, our phrase, "the big animal," will evolve from the meaning of the big thing, the animal. So that means the phrase, "the person sees the big animal," would come from the person, the big thing, the animal, sees. In this type of construction, the big thing, even though it's a noun, will be interpreted as an adjective because it comes before another noun. If we switched the order, the person, the animal, the big thing sees, then the big thing will now be interpreted as the object, and animal as an adjective. So, for our language, we have noun-like adjectives that precede the nouns they modify. It's a similar story with prepositions, or more correctly, adpositions. In English we call them prepositions because they come before the noun they go with. However, it's equally likely that they will come after the noun, and therefore get called postpositions. Again, whether they come before or after the noun will depend on whether they are derived from nouns or verbs. In some languages, like the Mayan languages, adpositions are transparently related to nouns. In others, adpositions can be seen to relate to verbs. For our language, we're going to use adpositions derived from verbs. So, a verb like to sit could be used to mean that a subject is stationary and located at or near the object. So a phrase like, "the man, the rock, sits," could over time take on the interpretation of, "the man is at or on the rock." And since in this language the verb always comes last, and our adpositions derive from verbs, this means our adpositions will follow the nouns that they modify. So we know that we're going to be working with postpositions. Lastly, let's talk about possession. Every possessive phrase has a possessor and something that is possessed, sometimes called the possessum or possessee. Most languages will treat the possessor like an adjective, as it describes the quality of the possessee. Because of this, languages tend to order the possessor and possessee in the same way that they order the adjective and the noun, respectively. And since we already know that our adjectives come before our nouns, so will our possessors come before our possessees. And voila! We have our basic word order patterns that will dictate how our sentences will be put together. This word order is actually fairly common across the world's languages. It's identical to the word order of Japanese, Turkish, Manchu, and Tamil. But this isn't a coincidence. Languages tend to fall into one of these two basic word order patterns, called head initial and head final. A head is basically the component of a phrase that carries the most meaning. So for example, if you have a phrase like, the big animal, we're talking about an animal, not about the quality of being big. So animal is the head, and big is the dependent. Notice that in our word order, all the heads in every instance come after their dependents, and therefore our language is exclusively head final. While it's very common for a language to follow these patterns exactly, it doesn't have to. Just take a look at English. Our verbs come before our objects, and we have prepositions before nouns, just like a head initial language, but our adjectives and possessive pronouns come before our nouns, like a head final language. History and happenstance can do a lot to mess with a language's word order, so don't feel obliged to follow either of these basic patterns 100%. As long as you have a historical explanation for any deviations, you should be fine. So, we've now outlined all the basic aspects of our syntax and can form proper sentences. Now we need to think about how combining these words can be used to express more subtle meanings. Join me next time when we start to construct some simple grammar.